Fantastic. All righty. Well, welcome everybody to today's Salt Lake City HubSpot user group event, HubSpot's Hidden Potential, a guide for customer success. Here's today's quick agenda, some light housekeeping with myself and Brandon. Then we'll go ahead and jump into David's presentation, followed by Q&A with David. Then Brandon's going to go ahead and jump into some what's new in HubSpot. And then we'll wrap up today's event and field any additional questions you may have. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Darren Burnson, but I do go by Doc. I am the owner and head coach here at Burnco Media, and I've been a certified HubSpot partner since 2013, and along with Brandon, the Salt Lake City HubSpot user group co-leader since 2015. Wow, that is like almost 9 years, Brandon. It is crazy.
I actually think we started this thing in 2014. Maybe had a meeting there at the end. So we might actually be at 9 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm Brandon, co-leader of the HubSpot user group, co-founder, whatever you want to say. I am the marketing director at Promevo. We are a Google partner that helps you with all your Google Cloud, Google Workspace, all that stuff. We do that for you. And I'm also an independent HubSpot consultant at BS Carter Communications. So I take on kind of a limited subset of clients to help them with all that stuff. Obviously, located technically Cottonwood Heights for those of you that are local. Yeah, and good to see everyone. It's always good to have these meetings. One of these days we'll get back in person, but in the meantime, like we just wanted to make sure that we kept meeting and like kept you guys engaged, and also, involve those of you that are not from the Salt Lake City area.
Right on. Yeah, so whether this is your first time attending a HubSpot user group event with us, or you've been to one or many in the past, we want to go ahead and welcome you. We are super excited to be here with all of you today. We've got people from all over the United States, so thanks for joining us. We are planning on hosting at least one more event this year in early December, so stay tuned. We're always looking for potential speakers as well for these Hug events. So if you've got something you'd like to share with our group, like David is sharing with us today, shoot us a note and let's chat. Lastly, if anybody here today has a specific topic you'd like to see us cover in a future event, go ahead and reach out to myself or Brandon directly, and we can look at covering that topic at a future event. All right, so I'm also going to go ahead and turn a minute or two over to Brandon to speak about a different event happening here in Salt Lake City in December that you may be interested in attending. I know I am. Brandon.
Well, before I jump into this one, I want to make a couple of quick notes. Like there is a chat bar and a question or a Q&A section. Like we'd love to like interact with everyone in either of those. Like if you have a comment or feedback on something, maybe like you're having a technical issue, drop that in the chat. And, we'll have some like informal poll questions that we're going to ask later in the chat. But also like as you get questions that you want the presenters to address, go ahead and drop those in the Q&A section. All right. So we have teamed up with HubSpot's mortal enemies, the Marketo user group. I'm kidding. Like it's friendly. Our friends at the Marketo user group are collaborating alongside us to build a part holiday event and part learning event. And you can see here, it's on December 12th. It's going to be at the Marriott City Center. I might be wrong. It might be the downtown Marriott. Either way, they're just a couple blocks away. If you go to one, you can walk over to the other one. This is a free event. It's got a lot of what I think are really good speakers. There's going to be food and snacks and things provided. It's again like part holiday event, part learning event. But there is limited space, so I will drop that link in the chat so that everyone can click on it and RSVP. But yeah, it's kind of a all-day event on December 12th downtown, and Doc and I are going to be there, and we'd love to see you guys there as well.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. Thanks, Brandon. Lastly, we are recording today's event, and we will be posting this video recording on our main page that you registered on later today or sometime tomorrow. And I think Brandon's going to go ahead and work up a recap of the event as well, and he'll let you know when that is live via email, when that is ready for you guys to go view. All right, let's go ahead and get this presentation started by introducing our featured presenter, David Askvig. David is the Director of Revenue Systems at Mark, and he led a monumental effort monumental effort of migrating 3 million. I mean, it is a difference in word, right? Monumental effort of migrating 3 million records in just 90 days. They ripped out Salesforce, Marketo, Outreach, and Zendesk platforms and moved exclusively to HubSpot sales, marketing, and service hubs. David is a seasoned HubSpot freelance consultant and RevOps advisor and is passionate about making HubSpot a powerhouse for everyone, even the often forgotten customer service teams, which we're going to be talking about today. So we want to go ahead and welcome David. Welcome, David.
Thanks so much. If you stop sharing, I'll get going. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Can you see that all right?
There it is. You are good to go, sir.
Perfect. Yeah. So thanks for the introduction. This week is big for me. I'm actually not working full-time at Mark anymore. I decided to go out on my own. Good news. Mark likes me enough to keep working with me. So going to keep supporting them in a contract role. My background has been in marketing. That's really where I started. Been a generalist, done, everything from design work to managed trade shows to demand gen. I always gravitated towards marketing automation, and which turned into marketing ops, which then turned into like RevOps, looking at like all the teams. And so that's a lot of my passion. So the agenda for today, at least for my discussion, is I'm going to give an overview of Mark. The reason that that's helpful is because as we talk about customer success, it kind of helps to understand how we kind of work together, the roles that I'm talking about. I'm going to talk about kind of what I'll call a macro challenge that we had to solve, and then some micro challenges. My favorite presentations are where people say, well, here's an actual problem and here's actually how I solved it. And so that's what I'm kind of hoping to do. Feel free to ask questions in the chat as we go. I'll try and watch them if I can, but there will be some time at the end. If you don't work with customer success teams, or perhaps you're more marketing focused or more sales focused, I do think this is still relevant for you, because when you see how someone else solves something, it gives you ideas for, oh, that's interesting. I could solve, this other problem, which is completely separate in that way. So I guess I would ask you to kind of have an open mind for, oh, that's an interesting way to solve it. And then think about how you could apply that in your own situation, even if it's not specifically related to a customer, success team that you're managing. So a little bit about Mark. Mark is a brand enablement platform. Think Canva for business. We can create templates for designs. You can lock down elements like logos and stuff, make templates, and then get it out to everyone. So that's kind of what Mark does. Mark has freemium or self-serve plans, and then also like enterprise plans. So the sales team only really works with these larger business type accounts. And so for the purpose of this presentation, I'm really just focusing in on this section of what we do, and our kind of our enterprise motion and so forth. So the roles that we have at Mark in terms of, so we have like the sales team, everyone's familiar, they're closing new business. We also have what's called customer growth managers. Some companies call them account managers. They're farming for growth, upgrades. They manage some of the renewal conversation and whenever we talk about contracting money. And then we have customer success managers, and these really help train our customers to be successful using the platform, the Mark platform. They have regular meetings with them, annual business reviews. Their goal is to help make them successful in the product. And so again, zooming in a little bit further, the focus for today is those two roles, and how do we enable them with HubSpot to do their job better. As Doc mentioned, we are using all-in-one HubSpot. That was a fun project to migrate over. We'll have to maybe talk about that someday. So I think architecture is a little bit helpful to just understand how things are connected. So we have our Mark product application. We have Recurly for finance, goes into Snowflake, and we also communicate with our HubSpot instance. This Geek Meter is medium. If you're wanting to go higher, this is actually a more accurate representation of kind of how everything's connected and tools and so and so forth. I will reference that. Some part of this presentation is talking about like, how do we get certain data into HubSpot that's then useful? And our architecture here allows us to do that. I have to make a big shout out to our analytics director, Yua. I've had such a privilege working with her over the last few years, and it's been super fun to figure out how do we architect things such that we have good, clean data where we need it for teams. And so she was a huge part of setting up this architecture. All right, so I wanted to start with why. So the title is, about making HubSpot better for customer success teams. So I was at Lucid Software in 2021, and then we were bought out by private equity, and then we became what is now Mark. And that's why we're forced to do a major transition of CRM and so forth. The focus was really on enabling marketing and sales to do what they needed to do. We really didn't focus much on this customer success motion. The team at the time was pretty small, and they, were using spreadsheets here and there. They were using the CRM in some ways, but it was never optimized for what they needed to do. And this became painfully true in a conversation I had with one of our customer success managers. And they're like, it would be really nice to know when our customers are renewing, like just like get a report of like, when are they renewing? Like, when does their contract end date? And it stopped me in my tracks. I was like, what? You don't know that? How do we not know that? And there was a lot of follow-up questions to that. And I was like, well, we can solve this. Like, let's figure it out. And it was at that point in my career, I was kind of transitioning out of like a more of a marketing ops, sales ops role into like a true revenue ops role, which included the customer success team. And so I was super excited. Well, let's figure this out. So that is what started me on that journey. I did want to ask a question. I would love to hear from you in the chat. How many of you, so kind of playing off of that story, how many of you can easily pull a report of your customer's contract end date or renewal? Perhaps you like, oh, we figured this out a long time ago, but I'm just curious. I would love to get something going. Good. Looks like Kai said easy. Good. Great. So I want to expand this now to what are some seemingly simple customer success related questions that you cannot easily answer today. So, sometimes someone comes to you with a question like, I need this data. And it's like, well, feels like a very simple question, but when you actually try and answer it within the context of how things are set up, where data is coming from, that can actually be pretty hard. I'm just curious if anyone has any simple questions that are difficult to answer. Putting you all on the spot. You didn't come prepared. If we got nothing, that's all right. We can kind of identifying unpaid invoices. Interesting. Actually, I do have a little slot in the presentation about collections that's related to that may be interesting to you. Good. If you have more, would love to hear them. So here was our macro challenge, and it was, how do we represent our customers in HubSpot? And when I say customers, those enterprise customers, those business customers where sales is selling them books of business. Again, it feels like a really simple question for us. It wasn't so simple at first. I wanted to show you a picture of skyscrapers. So I just found this. These are some of the tallest skyscrapers in the world. And a lot of times when you look at a skyscraper, you think of how cool the building is, how tall it is. But how many of you actually think about what's underneath the surface and the amount of time and effort, money that went into building a foundation that would actually support that? And that's super important. And so that's really where we started, is what is our foundation going to be for representing our customers in HubSpot? We had some requirements that we wanted to do. So we wanted a mechanism for customer success and growth managers to manage their books of business, to have their customers very nicely organized. We wanted to allow multiple separate customers under one domain. This one is a bit of a nuance. We work with universities, and many times we had multiple customer accounts. So they're represented as different customer accounts in Mark, but they rolled up under the same company and company domain. And so that kind of presented a little bit of a challenge. We only wanted to show relevant contacts for each account. So like when you land on this account, we only wanted to see contacts that mattered. And then we wanted to be able to pipe in relevant product, financial information that's actionable for the team and to help automate tasks and so forth. This is related, and I'm curious for you HubSpotters out there, how many people have used or turned this setting on, this create and associate companies with contacts? So basically what this does is if you have a contact come in your database, david@david.com, and the company david.com doesn't exist, it creates the company. It's great. It can be really helpful. There are some cons to it as well. And so we had that on. We actually liked that feature. It allowed us to easily associate contacts to companies. It created companies. And then, some of the pros is that once that company's created, HubSpot Insights will enrich it. You can take data from the company, put it on the contact. So like there's a lot of things you can do. The other neat thing is you can look at a specific company and see all the related contacts. Like, hey, how many contacts are actually at that company, regardless of where they came from or how they got into your database. And then you can see all of the activity, like what are the emails, tasks, tickets, all that in one spot. The cons are sometimes it creates a mess with subdomains. So for example, if you have, I'm just going to use Home Depot. If someone had an email address, which is david@homedepot.com, and then another one, which was, doc@homedepot.com, it can sometimes create two company records for the domain, which is email.hubspot or email.homedepot.com and then homedepot.com. And so sometimes it creates some weird stuff where you have to figure out how to merge companies and so forth. Also, for our purpose of account management, you don't always know which contacts are truly important for the account. So in the example of the university, which I mentioned, we sometimes had students signing up for free accounts. And so you'd look at all the contacts related to a university and there's like hundreds. And it's like, well, those don't matter to us. We just want to know which are the ones from a business perspective matter to us. So we had different options. So option one was like, and I'm guessing many of you use the company object to do this, but we could use the company object to represent our enterprise customers. Some of the problems that was going to cause was we did have multiple separate Mark accounts under a single domain. How do we want to manage that? We were also having all matching contacts being associated to companies. It was hard to tell which mattered. And then, as I mentioned, like this idea of all activities related to those contacts and all the contacts that perhaps don't matter to you from a business perspective all show up in the feed, and it's just not helpful. So option two was like, well, we could create a custom object to represent our enterprise customers. Some of the problems with that are they can require more effort to use. And sometimes some of the built-in functionality that comes standard with like the regular objects, they don't work as well. So that's something you have to kind of manage. But we ended up thinking about what we wanted to do, and we ended up choosing option two. So we went ahead and used a custom object to represent our accounts. And you can see here, this is like a screenshot of that example of a Mark account. So we named it Mark account. So it's separate from a company account. And let's see. The end. Thanks for joining. Just create a custom object and you'll be good. I just joking. This is not the end. There's a lot more. Let's keep going. So you might ask, well, how do you create these Mark accounts for every new deal? This was, I talked about the macro challenge, micro challenge. So now I'm going to kind of get into like, here's a challenge. What do we do? Here's a challenge. What do we do? So I'm going to reference the kind of some of the data model and how things were connected earlier on. So for us, pre-customer, you have a deal attached to a company, you have contacts. We pipe that data into Snowflake, which is our data warehouse. We use Fivetran. And then we're able to pump it back into HubSpot, whatever we needed. So what we end up doing is we end up setting up a customer table. So anytime a deal was closed as one, we set up a table, and then that also integrates with our product so that we can, gain product information like how many licenses do they have. We also connected it to our financial system Recurly, like what is their actual ARR and so forth. And then we can push it back into HubSpot, this record, which now is called the Mark account, and then make associations to the objects that matter. So like, for example, the company and the contacts. This also allowed us to, as I mentioned, this idea of having multiple accounts under one company. So, let's use, University of New Mexico as the company. We can have multiple accounts underneath that and be able to see and model that. So that is how we technically create this Mark account in our, which is a custom object within our HubSpot portal. I'm just curious, I didn't do a poll for this, but how many people are using custom objects in their portals? I'd love to see that. All the time. Yep. Great. So here is our Mark account, and I'm just going to kind of dive into some of the items here. So basically, now that we have this foundation, this home base, what do we want to build on it? What data do we want to feed into it? And so we can feed in a whole bunch of data. And one of the things I wanted to point out in terms of keeping things linked in our application, we have this idea of account ID, right? And that account ID syncs directly with this Mark account. So this allows us to always be up to date with whatever information is on that account. It also allows, there are some other applications our team uses to really dive into data on the customer, and they're able to very easily connect and look at this exact same company and not be confused. So we do things like subscription name, who owns it, who's the customer success manager, and then also this idea of renewal dates. And I did want to kind of mention a pro tip on renewal dates. This is something that, sometimes when you start uncovering rocks, you don't know what to expect until you start doing it. And so one of my learnings was we have a model where you pay, on an annual basis, monthly basis, it can be recurring. And so we have this idea of what is their expected renewal date, and then what is their contract end date. And those could be two separate things. So we could have a multi-year contract. Let's say they sign a 3-year contract, but they renew and essentially are invoiced every year. And so those are different. And so if you're asking the question like, well, when do they renew? Well, do you mean when does their next invoice go out, or when does their contract end date end? And those need to be separate pieces of information. We also did this idea of acquisition date, like when did they first become a customer? And so that's really important to pipe in there, because if you're, for example, doing a flow which says your contract's about to end, you would want to use this date, versus if you're saying, hey, your invoice is going to be sent out soon, whatnot, you would use a different date. So that's really important to have those separate dates. On this custom object Mark account, we now have all relevant contacts attached to the record. So the way we do this is we have this idea of account owner. Whoever owns the account, that contact is automatically attached and sent through Snowflake. And then we also allow our account managers, our customer success managers, to add whatever contacts matter as they're working that account. And so they only see those relevant contacts. We've also sent in product data. I'm only giving you a kind of a snapshot. We send in a whole bunch, but so we have this idea of licenses. How many licenses have they purchased? Have they allocated all of them? What is the utilization? How many of those are actually being used? And so forth. Which really, this creates a lot of data that's actionable for the team. They can create views, reports. They can very easily see what's going on with their customers in one place. One note, and I did mention this, when you're using custom object, you sometimes some of the default functionality that you want doesn't exist. And so we had this issue of emails, calls, tasks that you did with a contact didn't automatically pull into the activity history of this custom object. And so we worked with a company called Aptitude8 to build a custom coded workflow to do these associations. And so what that means is now that if I look at this account and whatever contacts are associated to it, I then see all relevant information. If I were to look at the company record, again, you would see a very cluttered view of all contacts that exist with a matching domain. It's just not as helpful for your customer success and account management reps to see relevant information. And this allowed us to really have a foundation for, well, what is our books of business? And so we have our different customer success managers, and we can say, well, how many accounts do you have? And we can start pulling data of, well, what's their total amount of licensed users in their book? I'll get into a little bit later the health score. What's the total ARR of their book they're managing, and so forth. So another thing that came up is this idea of, well, okay, how do we track and manage the implementation process? At the time, we really didn't have a great way to understand at what stage someone is in implementation, or when have they truly left implementation and become a customer. And so with the custom object, which is the Mark account, you can build a pipeline. So they work kind of similar to, I'm guessing most of you are familiar with deal pipelines. You can do that with the custom object, and you can build stages. And so what we did is we basically said, okay, well, what are the different stages that they should go through, and then build it as such. And so you can also start automating things. So for example, because we're sending in data, I'll just give you one example. We have a stage which is called template building. So a template platform, we want people to build templates for different designs. And that's really an important step of, are they moving towards getting fully implemented? And so this is just an example. We know now on this custom object how many brand templates the account has created. So if it's more than one, for example, we can then automate moving them from one stage to the next. And so we can, where possible, you want to take the heavy lifting off the reps. And if you can automate, do it. We also, once the customer is finished, so we move to this, in this case, we move to completed stage. It then moves into, if I were to click this drop down, it would be there's a customer pipeline as well. It just moves over there. And so it's very clear and easy to see where people are in implementation and so forth. Different information that we have. So we have things like tiers. So like we give a different level of service depending upon what tier they're at. We have the data implementation started. And then we also have this idea of implementation progress. So at one point, the question was like, well, how do we tell how far into implementation they are? And that can be a difficult question to answer sometimes. And so what we did is we basically said, okay, what are the 10 steps in this case to success? Like they need to check all these boxes and then they're implemented. And so these all exist as fields. Where we can, these have been automated. So for example, brand templates, in an earlier slide, we know when they've created a template, I can mark that as yes automatically. And this rolls up into a progress score. So 100 would mean like 100%. And so this gives the team visibility to see where they're at, but also kind of gives them a checklist of things that they need to do to make sure that they are they're checked off. And yeah, and so now that we have this, we can look at, okay, how many days have they been? What's the average days in implementation for different tiers? You can break this out by, customer success manager. Are some taking longer, some taking shorter times to implement their customers? And this one, I've had a lot of fun with scatter plots. Sometimes they represent a lot of data, but what is really cool about it is you can show implementation progress against length of time. So for example, how long have they been in implementation? And then how far progress wise are they? And this really allows you to see like, well, what customers are at risk? So for example, this customer is, 40 plus days in an implementation is 10% implemented. Well, that's a problem. You have to define what, metrics are a problem, but this allows you to then highlight those and you can dive in. So with scatter plots, you can just click on that and you actually see the individual customer. And so you can create, dashboards of each book of business and say, well, how long is it taking an implementation, and be able to report on that. We also did our implementation like email flows based off this object. So basically when this object is created, the Mark account, we then start implementation. You can see these tiers for, these are the different implementation tiers we have. And then emails will go out to whatever customers or contacts are attached to that Mark account. So as you add in more contacts that are relevant for the Mark account, they are then looped into whatever that implementation flow is. And that allowed the team to kind of manually manage who should be on and who should not be on that implementation flow. And then there was a lot of questions about like, well, how do we track post-implementation stats? So for example, if we were to look back, like, how long did it take us to complete implementation for customers? And so we, at the time that they move from implementation pipeline to customer pipeline, we stamp certain things. So like, for example, how many brand templates had they created upon finishing implementation? What was their allocation? What was their utilization? How many days did it take to complete? This is really helpful information to look backwards. And, if you want to create goals for different quarters of like, we want to accelerate this, or, we want to actually have them have more brand templates upon finishing. And then you can also kind of tie this to, well, if customers churn, well, how did their implementation go? Was that a big part of why they didn't gain, weren't successful early on and therefore churned? And so that's really important. I've found to stamp some of those metrics. So some are stamped and then some are always active, because you're going to actively manage this customer moving forward, and you want to know their current state as well. I'll just remind you if there's anything that piques your interest or you want me to like zoom in further, make sure to throw it in the chat. So this other challenge was like, well, how do we build efficiencies around renewals, and how do we manage view and renewal status in a quarter? So, there's a lot of things you can do. I'm just going to touch on just a few, but now that we have our books of business, now we know when they're renewing, now we know their contract end date. Well, let's build stuff. What emails do we need to send out to these customers when that's happening? What tasks do we need to create for team members? For example, do they have an executive business review or an annual review? Do they do a review 90 days out? Whatever that is, you can now start building your skyscraper and all the things that you want on top of that foundation that has been built. So this is kind of a little bit of an antidote. We had launched this new object. I was really excited about it. I'm like, this is so cool. I trained everyone on how to use it. And then in a conversation, probably a month or two, after doing that, I heard them talking about their spreadsheets. They had a spreadsheet to know like when people are renewing. And I was like, what? You're using spreadsheets? And so I said, well, show me the spreadsheet. What are you doing with it? How are you using it? And the team really wanted a way to see in a list view, okay, here's my company, and how do I really quickly see or update or make notes on what I think their status is? So am I working with them? Are they renewing the same? Is it at risk? And so forth, and have a place for their notes. And so I was like, well, I want you to be successful. I want you to actually use this. Let's do this. And so went ahead and essentially built this as fields, and then created a view for them to be able to kind of manage that. A few notes I'll put on this is, in order to do this, we had to create this idea of what quarter are they renewing in as a field, both, this shows the actual quarter, and then as a specific date. And so I have like a workflow that stamps these dates every quarter. And the reason that you want to stamp those dates, I think I had another slide. Yeah, is so think with me. If someone renewed yesterday, so November 7th, 2023, and you were to look at them today, their renewal is now 1 year in the future. And so it's always a future date unless they canceled. And so if I wanted the team to say, well, I want to look at a quick view of all my books in this spreadsheet view of, where their renewal was in Q4. Well, it's always going to be in the future. And so what we set up is basically this idea of being able to stamp this within a quarter. So if they're within the quarter, they can still look at it and see what happened. In this case, is the account still active? Because it could become inactive if they've churned. And that allows you to better create views that help the reps see what's happened. And then, notes are very easy to enter in here. I kind of made a little bit of a compromise. Typically, you don't want to, with something you want to do ongoing, it's not really a best practice to use like this note field, because next year they're going to need to do new notes, right? And the status could be this completely different. So this has to be erased every year. So I have a workflow that basically erases that at an interval that makes sense. But pro tip, perhaps you guys know this, but just like last week, I figured out this workaround, and I haven't completely integrated it, but you can create notes with workflows. So there's this tool. There's a bunch out there. This was just the one that was like cheaper or free actually for a certain amount of notes created. So hear me out. If you have a field on the object that's just a multi-text area, you can have a workflow that says, when that's known, create a note on that record. And so what this allows me to do then is, if they wanted to enter their short notes in this field, that's great, go for it, do it. I automatically then create a note for them. So historically, we don't lose that information that they've been putting in there. So I was kind of super psyched about that. Hopefully that's kind of helpful for you. If you have anything similar to that. I mean, you can, the sky's the limit here. You could do that for like the next step on a deal field. There's just a lot of different things you could do there. So anyway, I was super stoked on that. Okay, how to track and manage at-risk account renewals and downgrades. So I'm curious how you use it. If I'm curious, if you can put in the chat, have you used the deal pipeline to like track downgrades or cancellations? I'm just curious if people do that. That's what we ended up doing. So we have a deal pipeline. It's called the churn pipeline. And basically we say, hey, if you know or sense that this company is at risk of churning, either full churn or downgrade, we want you to create a deal. And then we're going to have, there's different stages. So the first stage is churn risk. And it looks like people have done the deal in the chat. And so basically this allows us to then put a dollar amount to what is it that we think is going to at risk. If it's a downgrade, if someone's like a 10,000 ARR company, they could be downgrading 5K, right? So we want to represent that as a negative value of, we think we might lose $5,000. And then you obviously want the close date to match the renewal. And so hopefully it moves to close retain. So I have three stages. You have close full churn, close downgrade, and close retain. So hopefully, you have a risk and it's moved to retained. And that was actually a request from one of the managers, is they wanted to see, of the accounts that were at risk and we did retain them, he wanted to be able to track that, because like, what did we do to retain them? So similar to when you lost a deal, when you retain one of these, we have a field that says, well, what'd you do? How did you retain it? And so forth. So we can kind of track that and learn from ourselves. Otherwise, if we didn't retain it, it moves to either a full churn or downgrade. And then this allows us to kind of very easily within HubSpot understand a date of when something churned and how much and so forth. This also provides a mechanism for Deal Desk to process that. So we don't have it completely integrated such that if you make it churn in HubSpot, it cancels their account in Recurly, which is our system we're using. So we have a Deal Desk team, which will then process. So once it moves to pending approval, then that needs to be processed and then moved into whatever final stage that it goes to. So that is how we work that. So how do we gauge customer health? I'm curious how many people are tracking customer health. So I would love to hear in the chat, like, are you? And then I'm going to just move to the next slide right away. If yes, I would love to hear some examples of like what specifically you're tracking to actually know if your customer's healthy. Feel free to drop in, like, what's a data point you'd use to gauge if they're healthy or not. Everyone's doing it, but you can't think of a data. What do we got here? QA visit scores, NPS. Great. Usage survey responses, renewal paid. Great. So that was something that we wanted to figure out. And again, I'm going to pull up this graphic again. Basically, what we did is I'm going to call it Yua, our data analytics director. She basically looked at a bunch of different traits about like, well, what makes a healthy customer? What are some of the things that come into it? And we were able to create a table in Snowflake to then push this health data to the Mark account. So we don't do the calculating within Mark. We actually do it outside of our HubSpot portal, but then we push it into this account. And so for us, some of the health scores were doc creation. I don't know all the nuances behind this. I didn't pull up the definitions, but basically, have they created docs, a healthy amount of them? Have they been successful with them? That would be like, have they printed and shared and that type of thing. We also found that like their invoice history, their past upgrades, template activeness, and so forth. This all plays into what is a trait for a healthy customer, and it rolls up into a score. And so this is kind of our main score. And then that goes into, it's a drop down. I think it's like healthy, needs attention, and at risk are 3 drop downs. And then this allows us to kind of at a high level point out whether or not they are an healthy account. Again, what we found with this is it's not, there's no magic data that says if they're healthy or not, but it helps show directional. And one, I guess, pro tip I'll mention is make sure you have this idea of a manual override. So for example, let's say this account, I'm the CSM and I know they're actually not healthy. They're talking about, how they're having issues. They're probably at risk of churning. I can then, with this dropdown, mark it as at risk. And then it updates the health master to be at risk. So regardless of whether the scores show as good or not, it allows us to have this idea of manually overriding that. And you can do that on the at-risk side. So for example, perhaps you had a conversation with this customer. They're super happy. There's a reason why some of these metrics are so low, and they're healthy. Well, in the manual override, you can mark them as healthy, right? And that will kind of flip it. So it's good to have some data, but also have the CSM be able to manually override that. So now that we had this health score, we were able to let's look at what percentage of our customers are healthy. If you can look at by customer success manager, what's the data? This allowed us to give visibility into stuff we never had. Other things we did is this idea of a hospital channel. So we basically have a health hospital channel. So if someone drops to at risk, moves into Slack, more people are aware of it. We can action on it and be aware of it. We can also assign tasks if someone's at risk such that we need to do something. The good old scatter plot again. This can also be used to understand how valuable your customer is. So what's their, for example, ARR, and what is their health score? So you can see, perhaps you have some poor health, but they're low value. So, if you needed to prioritize your time, perhaps you'd want to spend more time in this poor health, high value quadrant, because you don't, if these churn, you're going to lose a lot more than over here. So this allows you to then see that. And then you can, hover over one of these dots and see that exact customer. So what we did is we set up different scatter plots for each customer success manager to then see where their customers fit, and they can have a better visibility into that, like kind of on a mass level. How to share books of business for smaller accounts. So one of the things, I'm curious if this is your experience, but we want to provide the best customer support success for all of our customers. The truth is, for some of the ones that pay less, we can't provide that much support. So what we did is we said, well, how do we set up this idea of a pool account where, we have a few different reps that manage a really big book of business. And so what we did is basically we created a user, accountsuccess@mark.com. That's an email address, and we started creating tickets. So anytime any emails came in from this was like the person, account success was essentially the person that managed these books of business. We would create tickets, and then a team could manage a higher volume of whatever questions and so forth going on. You can also create that person as an actual user. You could also, use it in the sales tool with sequences and so forth. And then when you look at like, who are we assigning this account to? So we would have named accounts, and they would have smaller books of businesses, but then this shared user would then have the larger book of business, which had a lower per user ARR, but we still wanted to provide a little bit more personal touch than a specific named account. So that's how we were able to tackle that. All right. How can the growth team farm for upgrades? To be honest, I feel like we're still kind of finding our way here, but some of the things that we've been doing are, we now can see how many licenses a company has, and we can compare that to their company size to see like, well, what's the delta here? Is it a really large company? Do we think we can actually get more licenses? And we're able to prioritize some of that. Also added a field to know where the account manager can mark whether they think it's a high potential, medium potential, no potential, and then have notes on that to kind of organize their outreach. And then another one is back to this diagram. If we have 2 mark accounts under one company, we can kind of think about how do we run a consolidation play. We did this, for example, with a university recently where they had multiple accounts, and we're like, hey, we could roll this up and have a much larger account with a lot more licenses to support the entire university instead of you having multiple accounts. And so it allows them to have visibility into, how many, if they can run a consolidation play. All right, I think this might be my last micro challenge. So get your questions ready. So this is a little bit of a bonus. Is this related to the customer success teams? Maybe not directly, but there was a question or a comment about unpaid invoices. And so one of the things that implemented was this idea of let's send payment information into this record so we know, do they have an unpaid balance? How long is the unpaid balance? Has their account been frozen? Also like tax exempt data. Turns out that's really important in the collection process, because if someone was expecting tax exempt and they didn't get it, sometimes they just don't pay. They're waiting for you to send them an invoice without tax. So what we did is basically we auto create tickets. So we have a collections ticket pipeline that auto creates tickets when you have something past due and then someone works it. You can also do things like the customer success manager can be attached to that ticket so they're aware of that being past due. And then as they're having conversations with their customers, they can help prompt them to do that. We also, when we started sending this tax exempt information in, if a certificate expired or anything like that, we're able to preemptively notify the team so they can reach out in advance of their renewal so they can get that resolved, so that we're not sending them an invoice that's not tax exempt and then they have to go through the whole process of resending and all that. So that allows you to do that. So I would say, back to my skyscraper example, we had a solid foundation built and we're still kind of figuring out building what are all the things that we can do on this. And we're still learning, we could do this, we could do that. I just mentioned this whole idea of how do we create notes for them? That was something new. But show me the money. What are the results? Now, I can't take credit for all of this, but I know that this had a significant impact. So the same year that we implemented this account structure for the company, so we implemented it early on in the year, our net revenue retention increased by 3%. That's a non-trivial number. And so I think what that highlights is when you give the team good data and you enable them with good processes to better manage their customers, you're going to see results. Efficiency I talked about this idea of our pool account. How do we share, smaller value customers across multiple, in a more efficient way that allowed us to support these smaller accounts with higher touches, but it's less expensive for the business. On the collections front, just building a collections process that worked reduced our outstanding past due balance by 30%. So basically, debt on past due invoices on the books every month was reduced. And then there's no metric here, but knowledge is power. Now we have equipped this team with this foundation to be able to answer their questions about their customers, to better support their customers, and they're able to do their job a lot better. And so with that, I am going to move to questions. I hope that was helpful for you. I'd love to hear feedback and or questions about anything specific that I covered. Perhaps you have ideas of how you've solved things in different ways. Love to hear that as well. And with that, I'll pass back to the team and let's watch the chat.
This is awesome, by the way. Super cool.
Yeah. Do you want to go ahead and handle some of the... No, you're good.
Well, I mean, several of the questions are mine because I'm just like that. I love to
start us off.
So the first one would you mind going back to the data sources that you have connected to things? Maybe.
Sure.
I know you got a bunch of slides, but it was one of the diagrams at the first. I'm curious at the disparate sort of sources that are writing to that object. Because I know you mentioned Recurly. There are obviously some things that happen natively in HubSpot, and it's related to a question that I have is right, well, who's operating these tools? Like, for example, who owns Recurly within the organization? Are CSMs working out of there? Or is that purely a finance type team tool?
Yeah. So to answer your question, so I guess starting with Recurly is where, so when a deal is booked, it moves to pending approval, and then a deal desk team, which to be honest has actually been me for last while, will then process that. So entering that into Recurly, sending the customer an invoice, and now they have an account set up. So let's call it an enterprise account. And once that account's set up, it directly talks to our product database and creates an account for this customer. And all that lives in Snowflake, and then it gets pushed into HubSpot. So an account gets set up in Recurly separately, which then adds it to the product, which then pushes it into HubSpot as this custom object I talked about, was the Mark account. That answered one of your questions. Is there want me to dive
I think
into
the other thing
other?
is just I wanted to refresh here because it's I'm getting a lot of synapses firing on here's the different tools that you can have plugged in now, this, and this is my data ignorance perhaps, but the data warehouse part, is that required, or can you pipe some of this stuff directly into HubSpot?
You can. There are scenarios where you can send it straight to HubSpot. So you could use I've seen it use Workato, where you just send something straight through. We as a company wanted to use a data warehouse because there's just so much more analytical horsepower you can have with having that. So we use that for a lot of different, more advanced reporting. If you want to do any sort of data transformation, sometimes that's hard to do with a direct connection. For example, we set up tables in Snowflake for our Mark account, and then we were able to grab information from the product, from Recurly, from all these different places, and assemble that in Snowflake before we push it to HubSpot. So it just makes it a little bit cleaner of a process.
And one note, we're at the top of the hour, so I know a lot of people are probably going to have to drop. We'll keep going through these questions, and everyone will get a recording when we're done here. So don't worry about that if you have to run off. But all right, well, we got a few more questions that aren't just me pestering the chat. Chandler asks, are your CSMs manually uploading the health scores to each individual metric in HubSpot, or are some of those automated?
Oh, those are all automated. Yep. So I'm just going to pick one, like Doc Health Score. I don't know all the nuances, but basically, if they have 100 users, how many of those users have had a success with the document, meaning they printed it, they downloaded it, and so forth. And so that metric is assembled in Snowflake essentially and quantified as a number, 0 to 100, and then it's automatically sent into HubSpot. So the customer success managers don't touch any of that. It automatically goes in. The one thing they do touch, and I kind of called it out, is this idea of a manual override, because sometimes the data says they're unhealthy, but you talk to them, they're a healthy account. It allows you to override it both positive or negative. So that's the only thing that they're not required to do it. It's just an option. If they see someone's unhealthy, they can flip them to the other one.
Right. Another one from Chandler that is related to one that I had. I want to talk about the churn pipeline because that's a super intriguing idea. And my question, is that a dedicated pipeline or just a deal type? And then two, Chandler asks if does this also reset annually so that you can start over with everyone being not at risk if it isn't relevant? I think does that make sense?
Yeah. So
sorry, Chandler,
it is a separate pipeline. So we have a few different pipelines, but simply we have let's call it a sales pipeline, which is any new business booked, and then those auto renew. So the churn pipeline is when we are ready to basically the customer success team is tasked with creating a deal. If they know that their customer is going to churn because they are having conversations with them in advance, or perhaps they've gone dark, they would then create this deal and that close date. So there's different statuses. So they could be a closed full churn. So that means they completely canceled. And so the close date would be the date that they canceled, and the amount in here, which is a negative value, would be the full amount that was churned. It could be a downgrade, and that would only be represented by what was downgraded, not the actual full ARR or retained. So that is a separate pipeline. We did consider, so I've considered doing this idea of, well, why don't you automatically create deals every year? So for example, if their renewal or their contract end date is, December 1st, well, let's just auto create a deal. And then that deal will either renew the same, downgrade, or churn. And that's pretty compelling. I've kind of considered doing that. For our purposes, it was a little bit tricky because different team members did different things. And so the way we have it set up is our customer success managers submit the churn deals. But if it actually becomes an upgrade, then that's a different team. And so do we have two separate deals to represent the same renewal? Because typically, a renewal could go to an upgrade, right? It could go to a downgrade. It could go to a cancel. There's a lot of different ways it could go. And as we kind of explored auto creating a deal and then having it pushed to different places, it was going to be bouncing between team members owning it and also different pipelines. And it just kind of got confusing. Also, our kind of head of customer success wanted to understand if something was at risk and then was retained, why was that? And that we needed kind of a separate pipeline just for churn in order to do that. So I hope I explained that well. But there are a lot of ways you can kind of do it. And then you have to understand, how does your business work? What team members own what, to really answer that question. This is by no means do this exact thing for every company. You have to kind of understand how your team is set up and it works.
I just love the idea of, sort of taking or using the deal object as a way of giving a metric to a CSM. Hey, person X was able to rescue $100,000 in revenue this year. Like that's incredible.
Yep.
There's a few more questions. Just on the surface though, and this will be the last one for me, and I'll answer everyone else's questions. Like, why this instead of something like Gainsight? Like going out and investing in a tool that's just like that's all that this does, versus like HubSpot, where there's all this stuff happening. Like, just from a fundamental perspective, like why this path?
Yeah. Lucid Software was using Gainsight. And at the time, I just had my marketing hat on, marketing ops hat on. And so I really had no idea what they were doing. And so I can't completely answer that because I wouldn't say I've done a huge deep dive into all the different platforms and how they connect. But what I've heard from people is it takes quite a large team to administrate a platform like that. How well does it actually integrate in with the platform is something that you need to consider. Like, because we're using all this in HubSpot, perhaps some things we have to custom build that perhaps Gainsight has out of the box. However, all teams, sales, customer success, we're all looking at the same data, and handoffs of like, okay, a sale is now moved over to post sale is all happening within the same platform. We don't have, disparate data. We don't have to like figure out like, well, did this sync? Did I hit my API limit? I have to create a field over here and over there, or this information only lives in this platform and it doesn't live in that platform. Like, and so I just didn't want to go down the path of another system. Also, budget constraints. We already had HubSpot and they already had licenses to do some of their work. So it's like, well, why are we going to spend more money on another platform when we can kind of build something that works for us in HubSpot?
Stack consolidation. It's great. Doc, should we do one more and then keep going, or do you want to just keep rolling?
Just keep rolling.
What do you think?
Keep rolling. Let's try to hit everybody's questions as far as we can.
Okay. David, Joanne asks, how do you track customer outcomes / success plans delivered by your client success team?
So we have a field, which is like a mutual success plan. And so we basically have them put a link to that plan in the object. So I'm going to sort of half answer this. So that's one thing we do because but we also, shoot, I lost my train of thought. Oh, so with meeting types, we've been working on getting meeting types to be used. So if, like, for example, we have something called an executive business review or annual review, and that's, 90 days in advance of the renewal, this happens. And so we're able to track, have we done an EBR with the customer based on, did they log a meeting that has this meeting type? And so that kind of also allows us to track that.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, I think part of it might also be like, hey, not everything's going to necessarily happen out of HubSpot. Like HubSpot can give you metrics on, pipeline and, renewals and things like that. But there's also some stuff that, like NPS, like HubSpot as well. But, like there's a lot of different reflections on it. This one was in the chat from Sean. Are you using HubSpot for telephony? And if not, have you had any trouble consolidating call and HubSpot info into Tableau?
All of the call reporting I've done has just been native. We do use Tableau for some reports. We have different team members that do different things. So I can't really comment on calls being reported in Tableau. I have looked at other providers, like, for example, AirCall. And if I had the budget, I think there are better solutions out there for that, for sure, than the built-in HubSpot. But you kind of have to figure, well, is it worth the expense based on what you're trying to do? And we haven't, I guess, had enough pain or, seen enough value to do the expense of doing something different. But I do believe there are better solutions out there that plug really nice and easily into HubSpot.
Yeah. So these next two might be kind of related. One is from me, like you mentioned at the very beginning, you talked about the automatic association, attaching a person to a company. I'm curious about the associations with the rest of these objects. Like, how do you handle that? How do you get, or are there, and I know you had a line drawn from the contacts to the Mark account. Like, how does that happen? And what people are on that object? Is it an admin? Is it like a power user or what?
Yeah. So basically, so when a deal, this is a deal, right? New deal. You can have multiple contacts at that deal and it's attached to a company. In most cases, this deal is attached to one company, but it could have multiple contacts. So when we create this table in Snowflake, we reference the contacts that were attached to this deal as well as the company. And then when we create it over here, let's say there was 3 contacts that were primary on this deal. Those contacts are then, when it's moved into HubSpot, associated to the Mark account as well. And so we're essentially saying, here's this new account that's been created. This is a customer. Let's take all the contacts from the deal and then make sure they're associated to this new Mark account. And then we kind of, it's almost like, okay, customer success team, now it's yours. You're going to have conversations with them. You're going to have a kickoff call and you're going to learn that, oh, these 3 people that were in the pre-sale, they signed the contracts, but actually you need to be working with, Brandon and Doc. And so then the ask for that team is to then add Brandon and Doc as an attached contact. And we can't really automate, like we don't know who the main contact is. We don't know who they should be talking to. So we try and put relevant context that makes sense for what we have. But then we say, hey, this is your notepad of Rolodex of contacts for this company. You pick and choose. And so that's kind of how we manage that.
It's interesting. Like this one's near and dear to me because we have kind of a similar setup, but operating a marketing team, we get asked like, hey, can you send out a notification to all clients that have a renewal date of less than a month away? And it's like, okay, yes, but who on that client should I be sending this to? And it's like, is it everyone on the company? Is it someone that's associated with like that subscription or that account? And it's, I don't know, it's one of those like almost unanswerable questions. I mean, unless you like consume the entire user database, which it doesn't sound like you're doing.
Well,
it's
so one thing I didn't touch on here is we've talked mostly about this Mark account object. On our contact records, we also, from this integration with Snowflake in our product, send information to contacts. So every single contact in our database has a subscription SKU. So let's call it enterprise. They also have an account ID, which is akin to, I mentioned we had this account ID here, which is like how we match it up. And what this allows us to do is then if we wanted, and then we have what's called roles. So within our product, you can have like an account owner role, a template admin, a billing admin. And so all this information we're pushing into the contact record. So we have a lot of options for communicating with our customers. We can say, oh, we want to send an email to any contact associated to the Mark account. And we know that that's more hand-picked and selected by the CSMs as the main contacts. And so we could do that. Or we could also send an email to all contacts at said account because we have an account ID on each contact. And what role do we want? What subscription level are they on? We also push in. So like on this record, we have this idea of an owner. This is our account manager. And then we have the customer success manager because there's kind of 2 owners of our account. Those fields also push to the contacts. So if I were to look at Merriweather, I would see that Justin is the CGM and Melanie is the customer success manager on that. And so in terms of like, personalization tokens or sender, who it's coming from, it automatically comes from the actual sender. So kind of can do it in both ways.
Are those, you mentioned roles just real fast. And there's one more question, I promise, then we'll move on. Those roles are using, when you say a role, is that an association level or is that like a field on the contact?
When I say roles, it's actually in our product. So when you have, when you have like, when a new user is created, so let's say you get an account and you have 10 licenses on your account. We have one account owner. And so there can only be one account owner. They manage the complete account. And then you can assign roles within our product. So this person is going to be the billing admin. This person is going to be the template admin. And so when I say role, it's actually coming from our product and going into HubSpot. We can use association labels. I, to be honest, haven't had success getting the team to actually take the time to do that. There's probably some tools out there that could automate it. But again, like, so we don't use association labels on contacts as much as I would prefer we do, but.
Gotcha. No, it's same. All right. Last question. And we'll move on. Tanner asked, if we have different users within one company, does that account take in all the users? And I think if I can, or do we create multiple accounts? I think what he's asking is like, hey, what if two people from the same company sign up for Mark accounts? Like, how do you handle that? Is that even possible? Like, how would that go?
Yeah. So, well, I mentioned at the beginning, so we have free plan pro team that someone can sign up, pay with a credit card. We never talk to them, touch them. It's all self-serve. And then we have business. The user has to be unique by email. So for example, if, doc@gmail.com signed up for a free account, and then, Brandon@gmail.com created a business account and then invited Doc to join his team, he would then move from this free to a business. So like it can only be on one plan at a time, if that makes sense. I mean, if they had a different email.
Is it like delimited by domain perhaps, or
we don't
just like a unique?
Well, specifically in our product, you can do things called domain lockdown. So like if, for example, if, doc@doc.com has a business account and then, Brandon@doc.com registers, it could say, hey, you already have an account. Would you like to join it? And then it prompts Doc to invite them or whatnot. So there's that. But there's also scenarios where, we have businesses with an account that have multiple business domains underneath it. And so you could have multiple domains under one account. So it just depends on how it was set up.
Gotcha. Dude, this was awesome. Thank you a ton for all of this. Super useful. Like this whole time I've been sending DMs to, the person that kind of runs our HubSpot, like, hey, we should do this. We should check this out. So
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if anyone has questions, connect with me on LinkedIn. Shoot me a message saying, you found me here and would love to answer any follow-up questions you have.
You got it. Well, cool. If you can go ahead. Oh, you already did. Thank you. So, Brandon, I know you wanted to touch on a couple new items that came out with HubSpot. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll get jumped into that. And then we do have about 15 minutes or so left. So let's go.
I won't take 15 minutes. I'll be quick.
All right.
Hold on. It's taking a second to pull up. All I'm seeing is a blank screen.
Really?
Yeah.
What are you seeing, David? Are you seeing my screen?
I see prospecting, summary, lead, schedule.
Oh, no.
You broke your side of things, Brandon.
It's a problem on my end. All right. I can get it pulled up in another deck. I don't know. Those of you, we still have a few people here. Those of you in the chat, are you seeing a blank screen or are you seeing the deck?
It just shows a screenshot of the prospecting. Yeah.
Wow. There's other blankers.
See? Look at this, you guys. A bunch of our
Stop
users
sharing.
are seeing.
Try it again.
Let me try resharing it again. All right. How's this?
Hey, there we go. All right. So I just wanted to take a couple minutes. We didn't get to have, normally for the last 9 years, we have held an event immediately after Inbound where you either bring someone in from Boston to talk about what was announced, or Doc and I just talk through it. Obviously we didn't get to have a meeting then, but we're having a meeting now. So let's talk about some of the new stuff. This prospecting tool is really interesting. Those of you with Salesforce in your background might get a little bit antsy when you hear like HubSpot start to delineate from contacts, because that's very much a Salesforce thing. And like it or not, HubSpot has built what is kind of functioning as a lead object. I wanted to just tap on a couple of notes. I've spent some time with it. We're setting it up in my day job company, and I think it's a pretty effective place for like a BDR team to work, in that it kind of gives them some boundaries and like a single place where they can go, where they can see like leads that have been assigned to them. They can see their tasks. They can see like sequences that they need to act on. They can like view their calendar. Doc, if you'll pop over to the next slide. I'm curious if, those of you here, if you want to drop in the chat, played with it, if you've got your teams in there. We're beginning the process of bringing our BDRs into it. And like I mentioned, the pros of it are it's really simple. You can sort of isolate, like, for example, inbound leads or leads that are brought in through sales prospecting. Like we use Cognism and we use ZoomInfo. So it gives them like a place where they can see, what do you need to follow up with today? Some things that I've discovered on the or it can't quite do that yet. One is the tasks that are going to show up like today, tomorrow, or overdue, which again, like that's a plus or minus. Like it wants you to only like deal with the things that you have to deal with today. My company, we've got multiple sales teams, and so like it's not really easy for us to determine who is the owner. We actually have multiple owners or multiple sales reps on every one of our leads, depending on what department is working with them. So that's not going to work for us. Like we have to figure out how to get the main contact into that contact owner field. If you are like me and you've had a lead status field set up for years, this will not sync with that. This is like, you can customize the options, but it's basically a separate field. In many ways, and this is my last bullet here, is like HubSpot says it's not a new object, but it's kind of the new object. Like, for example, when you're referencing it in a list, you can't do it it's not like a contact field value. It is a separate object in that regard. If you want to build a workflow off of it, it's actually got a dedicated workflow type. So, I mean, keep these things in mind as you are exploring it. If you can reconcile some of these things, the last thing that I'll add is like, you might get a new contact from an existing client that comes in through a contact us form. So they look like an inbound lead. If you want to just say like, well, this isn't a lead, this is just like, a support ticket or something, then it's not quite that easy to, take someone off from that lead object. So anytime someone wants to mess around with this, come and grab me and I'll walk you through what I've learned. We might also have a presenter in December that will spend some more time with this, because I think it's pretty significant and it represents HubSpot adding some functionality that I think will at least put it on par in functionality with Salesforce. Like it or not, they're kind of moving in this direction. Doc, if you'll pop to the next one. A bunch of AI tools. I've been playing around with this one a lot. Like previously they had a where you could like in the middle of a blog post, you could maybe like highlight a section of text, have the AI bot trigger on, have the AI bot sort of like rebuild it or rewrite it. This one, like you can actually prompt the AI to create it. This is what it looks like when you start building a blog, for example, with AI. Go ahead into the next one. Some interesting stuff. Like I came in and I wanted to pick something random to see what it would do. So I typed in why IT managers should choose strawberry ice cream over peanut butter, just to see like what's it going to do with a prompt that's almost nonsensical. What's awesome about it is like it generated it really quickly. And whenever I first put that prompt in, it gave me a list. It gave me like some SEO metrics. So like the like rankability for it, which is pretty cool. Now, that being said, whenever I actually had it generate an article, you can see here where it's just like any AI, like generative AI tool, it's going to be a little bit generic. This one, all right, well, I don't know what to do with strawberry ice cream versus peanut butter. So it's like unleashing creativity and innovation, or enhancing collaboration and team spirit with strawberry ice cream. Like, it's just, okay, well, cool. I mean, you thought of something. So, it's super generic and it struggles with sort of uncommon topics. And this really gets back to one, prompt, like practice with your prompts, be as specific as possible in your prompts. And to, what I tell like my content team every day is like, never, ever just like copy and paste what the AI generated for you. Like, you got to spend time with it. So yeah, but I mean, it's a super neat tool. Once you get it dialed in, you can really crank out tons and tons of content. Let's go to the next one, Doc. All right, so just a bunch of other new stuff. Like, some of this is inbound, but most of this is from like the last couple of weeks. Just the rapidity with which they're spitting out new features is wild. So there's conditional property logic, which those of us that have been using HubSpot for our private CRM, I think I've been asking for this for like 9 years now. That's there and in beta. There's a number of things here, like form to meeting link routing. So those of you that have used like Chili Piper, for example, this is HubSpot's attempt at sort of recreating that. So basically what that does is there's no like confirmation page or email or anything like that. It immediately takes you to a scheduling page. And you can use criteria that you've acquired through the form submission to determine who gets routed to what. So if it's like number of employees is less than 100, then it goes to your SMB BDR. Over that, it's going to go to your enterprise BDR, for example. So Commerce Hub, which talks a lot about some of the stuff that David mentioned today, as far as like invoices and payments. Anyways, just a ton of fun stuff. Multiple knowledge bases. Like, my team is taking advantage of that. We have an internal knowledge base and an external knowledge base. And then finally, for you young folks, TikTok. I barely know what that is. I'm too old for it, but HubSpot integrates with it now. So have fun publishing whatever you guys do on TikTok. That's it. Anytime you guys want to talk about some of this stuff, come and grab myself or Doc or even David. And some of it will be like key topics on our next HubSpot user group meeting, which will be in December on a date TBD. And we'll send you out an email with all that information.
Cool.
TBD.
So we have a couple of people who are still left. Any just last minute questions anybody has really quick before we wrap this thing up?
Anyone want to come on stage?
Yeah.
We can probably stop the recording.
Yeah. So for everybody else, we're going to go ahead and kill the recording now, and we'll hang out with you for a few minutes.